Raise your attention to that today in the Standard, the US and the Austrian ambassadors to the OSCE published an editorial on this conference on this issue. So for those of you who read German, go to the Der Standard page and you can pick it up also the link from our Twitter account. So, but before asking you to read, I will pass on the floor to Becky. Thank you.
Thank you. See if I can. Can you, yeah, that sounds like you can hear me. Is that all right? Yeah. Thanks once again for inviting me here today. I'm very delighted to see so many people concerned about this issue. I've been asked to introduce this short film, which was made by The Guardian. I can't take any credit for it. It was commissioned by a very great features editor called Jessica Reed in The Guardian's American office, and it features 5 women journalists who work for The Guardian. Until last year, although it says senior lecturer in journalism, until last year I was comment editor at The Guardian, so I've got long connections with that organisation, and as comment editor published around 25 pieces of comment a day, which attracted sort of many thousands of comments. So I've come from this very much as someone who's witnessed the abuse rather than being a direct recipient of it, and I want to talk after the film a bit about my experiences there and what we tried to do as an organisation and what The Guardian now hopes to do in the future. So hopefully that will be nice and practical. But first of all, the film, if I just start it here, is that going to start? Whoop. There we are. Has it got sound? Should do, shouldn't it? No, I don't.
No.
I don't get sound.
Sound. It's plugged in.
Plugged in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lots of sound.
Lots of sound.
Here are some comments I've received recently. A bit of rape never harmed anyone.
I think you need to be gagged. All we do is fuck and chuck women nowadays because of the rhetoric of cunts like you.
Sadie Doyle of The Guardian is obviously a cold-hearted, emotionless, stony bitch.
I hope you perish in a gasoline explosion-induced car crash. Fuck off.
While no one deserves to be raped, ever, a typical slut has questionable character and reliability issues, among which is her predisposition to lie.
First, America was actually built on freedom. Racism entered the mix much later. Racists come in all colors, especially these days.
Why do you have to be for abortion to be for women's rights? How can it be a part of your body if it is a male?
On an article about men's hairstyles, I think someone needs a vibrator. Go have a smoke or something.
Here's when I wrote about the fact that women get harassed online. I will fuck your ass to death, you filthy fucking whore. Your only worth on this planet is as a wormhole to stick my cock in.
After I shared a link to a piece about a woman who had been jailed for having a miscarriage. The Holocaust was an individual matter of choice of many Germans and pro-Nazis. Also, abortion is, you are a Nazi. No punctuation.
So on an article I wrote about the N-word, yeah, you're fucked.
I had put up a picture of my grandfather who had died a few years ago, and one response I got was, "Kill yourself, cunt nugget." I don't know what a cunt nugget is.
Sex with Sadie Doyle would be the most perfunctory, acceptable sex imaginable. Makes your day.
I don't remember which article this was in response to, but it's stayed with me and I've really taken it to heart. You are a shitty journalist and you should stop tweeting your shit. No.
So these are 5 women journalists who write about a range of subjects. They don't all write about gender. One of them writes about American politics. Someone else writes a whole range of sort of lifestyle features kind of material. One of the others writes columns largely about race issues. So the kind of abuse they get bears no relation to what they're actually writing about. It's just sort of ubiquitous, really. I find the film quite shocking. Also, it does make me laugh sometimes, and I think that was part of the point, was to sort of just be a bit in your face about it. But it is also quite inspiring, I think, that they're just, particularly the last frame where Mary Hamilton just says, you know, no, I'm not going to stop tweeting and I'm not going to stop writing. I think it's a very powerful film, although short. I'd like to say right from the outset that women are not the only group to find themselves targets of abuse online. We know that black writers and Muslim writers in particular, I would say, come in for a very disproportionately targeted. But following the lead of several trailblazing women journalists, some of whom have been here today, I think that this issue has been put on the map now, and it's a place to start. It's to start with what happens to women. And I think thanks to women like that, we might have reached some kind of tipping point. So what did I see as comment editor? First of all, as comment editor, I saw a lot of this kind of abuse. Most of it gets deleted pretty damn quick. Some of it stays up longer than it should because we don't see it straight away. And as an editor who was commissioning women to write a lot, I felt a responsibility to them and was really tried to do something about it, as did the whole of the Guardian organisation. So what did we try? First of all our comments are post-moderated at The Guardian, so they're checked by a moderator after they've been launched. And one thing we noticed very early on was that if a comment thread got off to a bad start, then it was very hard to salvage it. So we tried various things to influence how a conversation began below a piece. So, for example, we established what we called a watch list, where any piece of writing that we thought for some reason, either because the person who had written it or because of the subject would attract abuse, we would put it on the watch list, and the moderators would prioritize looking at those threads, and they'd know when it was going to launch, and they'd be sitting on it when it launched, so that they could act very quickly before a whole load of bad comments had had an opportunity to derail the whole conversation. Watch listing does help, and the Guardian still uses that system, but the only problem is that sometimes it leads to a whole string of deleted comments, which in itself is quite damaging to the conversation below. Conversely, we also knew that if a thread started well, it usually continued well. So we had various things we did to try and make sure it started well. So one of them was, if we were running something that was a particularly sensitive subject that was likely to attract abuse, like, for example, a piece about rape that always attracts a lot of rape threats and unpleasantness, we would pre-moderate those threads, so comments wouldn't be made live until a moderator had looked at them. That is actually very effective. You get really nice threads then, because you can just not let the rubbish go up there, but it's very, very resource intensive. It's not really a solution when you're hosting such huge amounts of content and with so many comments, like somewhere like The Guardian is. We had other ways that we tried to get conversations going in a good direction. I was interested in what Judy Tang was saying earlier about developing counter-speech. That's definitely something we tried. We set up small groups of interested readers who, so for example, a small group of women who were very interested in gender issues. We had a group of Muslim writers. We had various sort of interest groups who, when we were about to launch an article that we thought would be problematic, we would send out a group email to this group saying, if you're available at 2 p.m. when it's launching, it'd be really fantastic if you could go and comment. We weren't asking them to leave positive comments. It was completely fine if they went in and disagreed with what they'd read. We were simply asking them to engage in an intelligent way with the issues being raised in the piece, rather than just to throw muck at it. So, again, that was really helpful. When it worked, it really worked, but it was a lot to expect from a small number of readers who have day jobs and couldn't be in our threads all the time. What else did we try? We knew also that if the writer of the article was visible in the thread and was answering some of the comments and engaging with what people were raising, not with the abuse, but with the sensible comments that people were leaving, we knew that helped the conversation go better. I think it's a sort of effect of, if people think they're talking in an empty room, they say terrible things, but when the person walks in, they suddenly remember they're a real person they're addressing their abuse to. Some writers were very good at that, did that a lot, and it did help, but some writers quite understandably just couldn't bear it really. And it wasn't necessarily they were getting the kind of abuse we've talked about a lot today, the really sort of extreme end. It was just the, the low-level kind of abuse that is there all the time in the background, which can't be moderated off. You can't really delete a comment because someone said for the 50th time, do you really get paid for this? Or do you call this journalism? Or, why are you writing about such an insignificant subject? Or, those are not things that go against our community standards. But the cumulative effect for the writer going in there is that the whole platform on which they're trying to express themselves becomes completely hostile to them. So a lot of our writers couldn't bear it. So we tried another scheme, which we called Adopt a Columnist, where we would read the thread on their behalf, and we would send them comments which we felt were worth engaging with. Again, not necessarily positive comments, but comments that were engaging with the content of what they were writing, engaging with the arguments they were making. And then they would email us back their comment, and we would post as if it was from them. Again, very helpful, but incredibly labor-intensive. So these aren't sort of long-term solutions to a whole problem. What they do show is they show how if you manage your community well, you can have an impact. But it's very very hard to do that to scale. We also lobbied very hard for various sort of tech solutions. So we asked for tools that would have helped our community managers and our moderators. We asked for tools which would have helped the sort of decent people in our online community, of which there are a great many, help them sort of police the threads better. But the problem for a news organisation like The Guardian is the web is developing so quickly. They have to stay on top of all those developments all the time. We have a limited number of digital developers. There's always so many competing priorities. It was very hard to get the time for someone to actually really look at what we needed and build what we needed and all of that. So that didn't happen as well as it could have. So anyway, all these things did help a bit, but they certainly didn't solve the problem. I mean, the other thing I tried, which I feel terrible about now, but I'll confess it because I think it shows how my own attitude has changed over time, is I used to say to women, you know what, you've just got to toughen up a bit. If you want to go online and write, you've just got to be a bit strong about it. They're just idiots, ignore them. Now, over time, I realise that's not any kind of solution, actually. It takes a lot of guts to write a piece which is then published and read by millions of people. And it's just very destructive to hear all this stuff said about you, and it's not helpful. It doesn't help the sort of creative process, and it can be very wounding to the person it happens to. And it can really chip away at the person's self-confidence, I think. And also, I think it has an effect on the whole readership and people who might think about writing in the future, and I think it makes them feel, actually, you know what, it makes women feel, I don't want to take part in this conversation below the piece, and it makes potential writers feel like, actually, I'm not going to contribute. So I think it isn't a solution to tell people to just get tough. I left The Guardian a year ago. I think even in that time, I think it's got worse. I think the effect of social media of amplifying these issues it's definitely got more extreme than it was before. And I think for a news organisation, for The Guardian, if we're talking about what people can do, it's very hard. You can do a certain amount to control how the conversation goes on your own platform, but there's a whole nother set of issues to think about how you're going to engage with the abuse that happens to your women journalists when they're on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram even. So we need to think about that too, of the sort of cross-platform nature of abuse. So I left The Guardian in 2014 to take up this new job, and then after that, Catherine Viner was appointed as the first female editor or editor-in-chief, I think the role is, of The Guardian. Kath Viner has been at The Guardian a long time. She believes very passionately in open journalism and has made several speeches about how important open journalism is. She's talked a lot about how the open web has made it possible for journalists to interact with their audience, how valuable that is, how valuable an engaged audience is to journalists, that they collaborate with journalists in all sorts of ways, from helping us discover stories to helping us disseminate them, and that this interaction also really changes the nature of the relationship between the journalist and the audience in ways that are positive but sometimes painful for journalists. So there's been a shift in the hierarchy, I think, where journalists are no longer sort of talking from on high and delivering their words of wisdom and then going away again. They get a response, and that can be difficult. But it's also welcome, I think, in many ways. But although we welcome the open journalism, and The Guardian has really actively embraced that, it's, as the first women editor, Kath also believes very much that the web must become a space where everybody, regardless of their race or gender or faith or sexuality, can all participate, and a space where no one's shouted down or silenced. So she's now commissioned this bit of research, which I'm going to be helping with, into the online abuse of women journalists on The Guardian. And right from the outset, the research is going to be very much solutions-focused. I must add the caveat that it hasn't really begun yet, so what I'm talking about is very much our hope for it, not, we'll see how it works out. So in sort of considering this, I've sort of thought, well, how do you begin? And I think I would like to say we mustn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that there's this is the real challenge for news organisations, is we want the web to remain open, we want people to comment on our journalism, we want to know who our audience are and what they think, and we want to engage with them. And there are very important editorial reasons for that and commercial reasons for that. So, and that will necessarily include opening up stories to comments and encouraging journalists to engage with readers. So I believe that not reading the comments or disabling comments, as some people have done, isn't a solution, because it deprives journalism of what is a great opportunity. And even in any case, even if we wanted to stop it, I don't think we could. That genie is definitely out of the bottle, and if we stopped people commenting on our own platform, they would go somewhere else. So I don't think we can stop it, and I don't think we should want to stop it either. But we do need to safeguard our journalists. So in other words, with these great opportunities, I think sort of news organisations are really beginning to wake up to the fact that coming with that is obligations to their staff and to their freelancers also. So just some really preliminary thoughts about how we can go about fostering a better kind of conversation around our journalism. Particularly when you're operating at such a huge scale with sort of 40 million unique users every month with God knows how many comments. I meant to bring the current number, but it's just absolutely vast. So how does a news organisation take a responsibility like this seriously? A lot of people here have talked today about the need for research, and I think that's definitely part of it. We need to better understand the problem. I think it's interesting, the idea of different levels of hate speech. I think for a news organisation, it might be that it becomes easier to deal with the really virulent abuse of the kind of nature that we've been discussing this morning. What might be harder, but in my view is as important, is dealing with the low-level abuse, which just makes the news environments very hostile to women. So I think we need to do research into who the targets are, who the perpetrators are, what we know about the abuse. And I think although that we know that abuse is gendered, we know women get it worse than men because it's so obvious when you're sitting on top of those threads every day. We need to have a much better understanding about how race and faith and other axes interact with that. Secondly, we need to look for solutions, and I think we need to really have a conversation as a whole industry and share best practice and talk about what works and what doesn't, and what we've tried and what the pros and cons of different things are, and actually try and build up a sort of industry-wide best practice in terms of how to manage online communities well and how to safeguard journalists when it does go wrong. We need to revisit everything about how we actually do our journalism. So I think we need to revisit how we commission things, who we commission, how we sell stories online, how the headlines we put on things. The amount of times I've seen conversations which are very abusive to the writer, and in fact the thing that they're picking on is the headline, which the writer didn't write. And I think we need to be much more sensitive to the impact of our words online, and always ask ourselves, are we proactively trying to dampen this abuse down, or are we inadvertently actually fostering it? There are definitely tech aspects to this. I think we need to look at developing new tools which help us manage our communities much more effectively and help those communities manage themselves. Because I think actually what gets forgotten sometimes in discussions like this is that most people who contribute online do so in a civil and interesting way, and that they don't like this abuse either. And we need to somehow, that's a real resource that we need to find a way of using. I've got a very open mind. I mean, these are just some things I'm throwing out there, really, and I'd love to hear what other people have to say about it. If anyone has any thoughts, this is the time to mention it after, grab me afterwards. But to sum up, I don't think we can stop comments. I think they're an integral part of what the web is. I don't think we should want to stop them, because I think they're journalistically, they represent an amazing opportunity for us, as does social media. I think it's a great thing. I think it breaks down hierarchies between journalists and readers, and I think that's a positive thing. But I think that news organisations have to take their responsibilities seriously, and that they owe it to their journalists. And that's it. So, go to the next panel. Thank you.
So if I can use my position from here to invite Barbara Trionfi to assemble her next panel as the moderator. Barbara is the director of the International Press Institute, and she'll chair the next panel.